Good morning, everybody. I think we can get started. Well, welcome to our webinar on using data analytics and BI tools to save on payroll costs. We've got a nice mix of finance and HR people today. And my name is Jonathan Aiken. I work for HR Talk, and my background is actually in finance. But I joined HR Talk about 5 years ago, and since then I've been trying to mix the two, learning a lot about HR and then trying to apply some of the finance techniques and processes to improve things in the HR environment. A couple of things then, just in terms of takeaways, please, today, because we've got a nice mix of HR and finance people. I think for the finance team, let's talk about the HR team first. As a takeaway from this webinar, please, if you can learn one or two things, is that BI tools are fantastic to better communicate your success in the organization. They're great for really getting HR to contribute directly to bottom line success, which is very important. And also for those of you who have more complex workforces in multiple locations, it gives you a great tool to analyze and look at those workforces that you can't touch and feel on a daily basis. And for the finance people, BI tools, for me, they like being a kid in a candy shop. There are so many applications you can use them for. So really, if you're not using them already, I really urge you to look at them. You can streamline your reporting. You can start to put in information from multiple systems. You can better introduce dashboards, improve your management reporting. There are so many things that you can do with them to make them better. So what I'm going to do, if we start off here, is share my screen. I'll try and stop my video so you don't have to look at me. If we could start off, please, Akila, would you mind starting the poll? I'd be really grateful if everybody could just fill in the 3 questions on the poll. I just want to see where everybody is in terms of their knowledge of BI tools. Okay, Keela, if we've got some results there, can you please just publish that poll for everybody to see? Okay, so that's good. So everybody has got, people who filled in the poll have got some idea of exactly what a BI tool is. And we've got quite a bit of variability in terms of the impact of payroll costs on your overall cost base. Akila, I don't know. Yes, I can. Okay. And in terms of percentage of your payroll cost that is variable in nature, we've also got a little bit of a mix. So just in terms of the relevance of that last question, this is the sweet spot for using data analytics to help save on costs, but it's not the only area. So where you have got a high element of variable cost, there's a lot of potential to use these tools to save on costs. Okay, but as I said, it's not the only area. Great, thank you for that. So then if we get going, I like to start just talking about the bigger picture in terms of HR and why then BI tools and data analytics becomes very important. So the role of HR over time has become quite complex. There are so many areas that HR has to get involved in, and it means that most HR practitioners struggle to get the right focus. They don't know where to spend most of their energy getting it right to make it critical, to make their role relevant for the organization and to help the organization in the best possible way. Generally, they're under-resourced to do all of these elements, so they have to choose the places to operate. The idea behind the BI tool is it gives you a tool to help with that. It's not expensive, it's extremely valuable because it can focus your attention on the right places. it improves the communication, and it allows you to set specific targets that you can then measure. In terms of what I'd like to talk to you today, so while you have, some of you have, well, most of you have had spent some time with data analytics and BI tools, I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We'll do a brief introduction. We'll look at the pros and cons of using data analytics. I'll start to then talk about how do we identify and achieve particular savings. I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about a tool that we've developed to identify areas that we can look at for payroll cost savings. And then I'll spend a little bit of time on practical examples. So how do you set up the BI tool? How easy is it? Because I don't want this to be a black box where you don't know what's under the hood. So if we look at data analytics is really a three-step process where we collect data from different sources, whether it's Excel, whether it's an SQL database, whether it's SharePoint, wherever the data may be sitting. We analyze the data, and then we come to some conclusions and we make key decisions. So all it really is something we've been doing for a long period of time, which is analyzing raw data to reach a conclusion. Business intelligence tools are more modern tools that allow us to do this much faster with a lot more flexibility, so we can dig into the questions, we can update the information much quicker, we can get real-time answers. So the BI tools really enable us to do individually what would have taken us a lot more time and resources to do in the past. And practically, what does this mean? So historically, as I talked about, if we wanted to get a particular question answered, we would get an analyst, usually a finance person, to work out a few things for us. They would go and get IT involved to pull the data. They'd go and chat to the relevant business area. They'd pull the data together. They'd do the analysis, and they'd come back to you with a report. Problem is, because of broken telephones, the report would probably not answer directly the question exactly as you wanted it to, so you then send it back for another iteration. So the whole process would take quite a bit of time, and by the time you got the real answer, you generally find that the question was no longer relevant. And a lot of the emphasis here went into the planning process. With the BI tools, however, with relatively little setup, we can get great answers that allow us to dig in interactively in a fraction of the time. And what we do in terms of that process is we decide on what we want to see. We link the data to the BI tool, and if it's cloud-based information, then it's great because that linkage is real time and easy to refresh. If it's sitting in Excel, then it's obviously dependent on how often somebody updates that data. We then teach the BI tool how to clean up the data. And the fantastic thing about this is once we've taught it how to do that, we don't have to ever do it again. So it doesn't matter what format that data comes in. We set a series of rules, and as long as the format is consistent, then those rules then act each time to clean it up, and so we don't have to ever worry about doing that same thing manually. We set up our dashboards and our calculations, and anytime we want to see the data and see exactly what's happening, we can just refresh it by clicking on a button. So it makes things, it means that we spend a lot more time actually looking at the real data and the results and conclusions, rather than spending the time putting it together and building the model. We need to be aware of a couple of pros and cons, though, in relation to data analytics and BI tools. So the first thing is a little bit of a misnomer out there. We see a lot of our bigger organizations in South Africa tend to go the whole hog, and they go and buy a data cube, and they spend a couple of million rand setting up a BI tool within the organization, and they don't really get the benefit because nobody knows how to use it properly. Okay. In our experience, the people who get the most out of the BI tools and the access to data are commercially minded people. It tends to be senior management. So we don't think that you need the full organization-wide license, but obviously that depends on your organization. If you only apply it or only get it for a couple of key individuals, the cost is driven down dramatically. In addition, you don't have the same concerns around the security of data, which becomes increasingly difficult when you're now having a data cube that's accessed by multiple individuals. There are a number of commercial BI tools that are easily available. So ClickView or Power BI, or the Power BI is a Microsoft product, ClickView standalone. They work extremely well, and they probably cost about $10 a month per user. So they're not expensive. In order for you to be successful, okay, we tend to find key management must be prepared to use it because, as I've mentioned before, commercial focus is very important. If you can't get somebody to apply their mind to it, it's not really going to work successfully. We always find that when we introduce this at a client, the quality of the underlying data is often poor. So part of the process is using the tool to identify what data is important for your business and then fixing it. Okay, GIGOs, for those you're not aware, is garbage in, garbage out. So if you have poor underlying data, doesn't matter how good your tool is, it's going to give you the wrong conclusion and you're going to make the wrong decisions. Third important thing is there is a tendency, if you do this as a bigger project, particularly where IT is involved, that you can get lost in the data. Our experience indicates it is better to focus on what is material to your organization. So if you build something, don't build it to cater for everything. Think about what's important for your organization and focus just on those key metrics. There is no point doing this unless you actually make decisions based on the analysis. Otherwise, it's just a nice to have. And I come back to the same point. When you look at the data, when you put it together and you do the calculations, somebody needs to be able to say commercially, this pattern looks funny. So what? Why is it important? Why is it happening? Is it relevant? Is it an anomaly? Or is there an underlying actual practical thing we can do to improve this metric and actually save money? Okay, and that's the most important thing when you're looking at the BI tool is, so what does this mean for our organization? If we then look at the process of identifying and achieving savings, I'm going to use a case study example, which I'll go into later when I actually run the BI tool. And this is around the particular hypothesis we're using here is around using, oh, sorry, that shouldn't be study leave. Sorry, this should be using sick leave. Apologies for that. Not sure why I had that in my mind. So it's using sick leave to identify underperforming employees and managers. So the first step is for us to design the hypothesis. So why does this make a difference? Okay. Often with clients, we see that they look at sick leave as nothing they can do about. Yes, they can get somebody to provide a sick note if they take sick leave twice within an 8-week period, or if they've taken more than a certain number of days. But there is so much sick leave that people can take in South Africa, so often managers just assume there's nothing they can do about it. The objective here, though, is not about managing sick leave per se, although that's a side effect. It's more about saying that those employees who take excessive sick leave are more likely to have underlying performance issues. And related to that, bad managers, whether they are too strict or perhaps too lenient, are more likely to have higher absenteeism in their teams. So that is the hypothesis. So once we've designed the hypothesis and we believe that that is something worth investigating, we collect the data, which in this case would really be historic sick leave records by employee, by team. We test the quality of the data and we fix it if it's not accurate enough. So we look at the missing records, we look at missing employees, we sample test, and we make sure we're comfortable with the data. We then run the BI analysis and we look at the top 10 employees and the top 5 teams, and we spend the time and we go and investigate them. Okay, so the BI tool throws out those lists very easy for us, and we can refresh it very easily. If we then go and investigate, 80% of the people are probably fine. They've got an underlying condition. They've taken the sick leave for valid reasons. Okay. Sorry, the top 10 could be top 10%. It depends on the size of the sample that you want to look at. 80% of them will probably be fine, but when you go and chat to the manager, you'll find that 2 out of those 10, or 20% generally, there'll be an underlying performance issue where the manager has said, look, yeah, I've been worried about their performance, but I've been too busy to do anything about it. Same thing with the teams. You weren't aware of something because you don't see people operating on a daily basis. One of those 5 teams, you'll find the manager is putting people, is not working in the way they should. And that's putting pressure on the team, or the team is taking advantage of that manager. Now suddenly you've got this tool where HR looks prescient. They've gone into the organization where they've got no relationships, and they've identified underperforming employees where if they didn't step in, it might have resulted in a grievance where you actually would have had to pay out money, but now you can go through a performance management route and do things effectively. So if you get this to work, HR's ability to perform and to perform in a remote environment is significantly improved. So after you run an analysis, you've got to investigate, you do these real world actions, you start a disciplinary process if you need to, okay? And then the next step is the ongoing savings. So even though I've identified some specific things and actions you can take by identifying and investigating these employees, there are also additional steps that you can take on an ongoing basis. So what you could do is you could say, okay, we haven't really looked at sick leave before. If we look on average across the organization, we are sitting with maybe 5 or 6 days per person of sick leave. We think a more realistic level as we look at our type of organization is 3 or 4 days. How can we bring that down by 2 days? We can start a communication plan. We can monitor it. Once again, we can't say to people you can't take sick leave. Okay, but in our experience, often people are taking sick leave is because they see their manager taking it, or because nobody's ever shown that they're actually looking at their sick leave and saying, what's happening here? Okay. As soon as people see their attention is being paid to things, they suddenly go, maybe I shouldn't just take this Friday off because I'm not feeling 100%, I don't really want to come to work. Okay, and you can then monitor that on a quarterly basis. So this is one example where you can look at a particular performance issue within an organization and you can make real savings. The process is, what is the hypothesis we want to look at? Let's get the data, let's test the data, let's run the tool, and then we must have an action and a feedback loop. So what we end up with is for $10 per month in licensing, we get a tool that helps us to identify potential underperformers and proactively deal with them. And talking numbers here, if we're looking at a small company with 100 wage employees, if we reduce the average sick leave by 1 day a year, we create a saving of about 70,000 Rand. Now, if we're talking about 1,000 employee business, that's 700,000 Rand. Okay, and that's only by reducing the average sick leave. That's not by looking at all the other elements here. The potential payouts on grievances that we haven't dealt with early on. The saving in management time. There are various things that can come out of this. So it can add up, and this is just one element. Moving on from that, so that was really around the process of how we follow through on this. What we have tried to look at is to try and create a structure for HR to look at the payroll cost in a little bit more of a number, on a numbers basis, so a bit more financially, rather than looking at things from a qualitative perspective. And what we've designed is a thing called the payroll cost performance, which is your total payroll cost divided by either your net profit before tax or your revenue. Revenue is easier to work with and is less lumpy. The problem with revenue is it doesn't build in the rest of your cost base, And so you end up with a situation where you might have a great metric based on revenue, but overall you've lost track of what's actually happening in your organization. You're not making any profits, which doesn't help. So we'd probably advise you to do it based on both. And the objective here is to try and minimize this metric. Okay, it's to deliver the greatest profit or revenue for the lowest potential payroll cost. Now, I use the word potential deliberately because the easiest way to reduce this metric is to just fire everybody. Okay, because you've got no payroll cost, but then you've got no business. So the potential refers to the fact that you need to have people in place to actually perform the operations necessary to deliver the revenue. Okay. Now, where we find this tool is extremely useful, okay, is in starting to set budgets and to start looking at, so let me give you an example. If we're looking at the scenario where we're sitting in the current economic climate, okay, we are sitting at, likely with much lower revenues, and as we try to plan ahead, we need to work out, are we expecting to grow revenues, or are revenues going to be flat? If they're expecting to be flat, we shouldn't be bringing on any new headcount, okay? Or alternatively, if we do bring on new headcount, it should only be in a situation where we manage our payroll cost performance so that it doesn't increase out of kilter. Okay? Just because there is a vacancy, because somebody has left, doesn't mean we have to fill it. Only if we can show that adding on that extra headcount will either improve the revenue or reduce costs, okay, through efficiencies, should we be adding that headcount. It allows us to be a lot more focused on why we are adding headcount. Okay. It also helps us to HR to communicate with finance to say, listen, the reason we are doing the things we are doing, okay, we are hoping to have this impact on either revenue or costs, and link the HR performance to bottom line financial performance. What we then do with this payroll cost performance metric is we then break it out. Okay, so that same metric of payroll cost over revenue can be broken out into fixed pay times the number of employees over the revenue metric. I'm doing the revenue metric here. Variable pay over revenue, and then our other types of costs, training, recruitment, compliance, all the other payroll costs that we'd have. The reason we break it out is because what we want to do in each organization is we want to say, which of these elements do we think that we have the most ability to make savings or control? Because if we identify them, that's where we want to build our metrics and use our BI tools to find the savings. So when I asked the question in the poll earlier, what percentage of your payroll is variable pay? If they have a big percentage of variable pay, this is the absolute target area, because this is a place, overtime, commission, all the variable pay elements have huge potential for being overstated and not controlled properly. Oh, sorry, not finished there. In addition, we will find that a lot of these extra costs here, we sometimes take as fixed, but we don't look at them properly and say, by changing, for example, some of the elements in these others, how are these costs impacted? And this is not a case of trying to protect your budget. It's about trying to show that when we spend money in these areas, it is for good and valid reasons, and they add to this metric. Okay. So if we then take that a step further, so what I've said, we come into an organization, we've looked at the place that we think we need to target. The next step for us is to look at submetrics, or things that we can measure that will help us to look at that particular cost and manage it better. So we've got a couple of categories here that we've designed over time. So the first category is looking at staff turnover and the cost that's impacted. So obviously high staff turnover, higher recruitment costs. Okay, and the recruitment cost is potentially external recruitment fees, it's management time, it's incremental training costs, it's lower efficiencies over time. Some of those are direct costs, actual cash. Okay, so the external recruitment fees are actual cash. Others are opportunity cost. Okay, where it's a little bit more difficult to measure the impact directly on the bottom line, but it does have an impact, and it's worth measuring those. It impacts training, management time, number of employees. Okay, so all of those things are actual costs that are impacted by higher staff turnover. The metrics that we would use, we would look at the number of leavers over the number of employees on average. And we can break that down. We can look at by department, by division, by cost center, depending on how your organization is structured. We can also look at recruitment cost as a percentage of the total payroll cost. The action we can take there is to improve our recruitment process. So if we find that we introduce the concept of screening before, so practical and psychometric testing to make sure we get the right people, not only does that improve our staff turnover, but it also improves our efficiencies on the job. So spend a little bit more money. Okay, it's much easier to justify spending more money up front if you can show that there's a target on what you want to save in terms of your staff turnover. We can put in place an employee retention program. Okay. Now, both of those, what the objective here is to say, dear CEO, or managing director, whatever it is, we want to spend 50,000 Rand on this program, okay? But this is where we expect to save. We expect to save 500,000 Rand, and we will measure it. And if it's not working, fine, then take it away from us, but we're confident that it'll work. Because now you're actually using numbers and you're showing what return you expect to achieve. In terms of the second category around employee efficiency, what we're looking at here is the number of employees. Okay. Now, the standard response I get when I go in is, but we don't just want to go on another retrenchment process. We've been through this thing. People have taken a lot of it. That's not what we're looking at here. Okay. What we're looking at is the mix of where our employees sit. So we look at metrics that go, what is our revenue per employee? What is our operational payroll cost over our profit or our revenue? What is our admin payroll cost over our profit or revenue? Okay, and what we're trying to do here is we're trying to say, okay, if we target a 10% admin cost over revenue, and we're at 10% already, we don't want to add any more admin people unless there's a really good justification. Okay, revenue per employee. If my revenue per employee is say 750,000 Rand, when I hire somebody, okay, that is costs me more than 750,000 Rand, they need to be adding more than that in the value they create. Otherwise, overall as a business, I'm going to be less effective. So it's linking your recruitment decisions to the output that you are creating in your organization. Where you then have wage employees and you have shift management, things like that, this can be linked very closely to better shift management. So for example, at that level, particularly in a bigger organization, if various shifts are doing exactly the same work and you are measuring the output per shift or the output per employee doing similar things, you can use that to say, well, how come this shift is doing so much better than these others? What are they doing right that the others aren't? If we can get everybody else to that level, which is now coming to the whole Six Sigma and some of these other operational platforms, then overall your business will do better. You can reduce the number of shifts, you can improve overtime just by doing things better based on looking at the data and seeing which shift is more effective and why. The third category we look at is relative cost or waste. And we look at this in both, it impacts both fixed pay and variable pay. So this is now looking at your sick leave as a metric, for example. It's looking at variable pay as a percentage of payroll. And a lot of what we do here is looking at variable pay patterns, overtime, commission, but breaking it down in detail per shift, per type of work, and trying to identify the patterns that might indicate that people are not working as effectively as they could. These are easy to fix because it's not a fixed pay element. Okay, so it's just by managing things better and monitoring and speaking to managers and doing things in a better way that we can actually make real cost savings. So this relative cost of waste is a place to actually make cash savings. I'll give you a very simple example that we've seen in this space. Time and attendance data. Okay, it's an absolute nightmare in South Africa across the board. Okay, very few companies do it very well. Often what happens is we get the data in, it comes to a person in HR or payroll, they're expected to turn it around very quickly to make sure that people get paid. Very little time is spent analyzing that data to see what's happening. 2 examples of what can go wrong. Some guy doesn't pitch up for a shift, but that nobody ever checks to see that there's no leave taken against that, particularly where somebody's on a fixed pay element, and so they end up taking the day off and they're not taking annual leave for it. Okay, we see that quite often. Secondly, we get a time and attendance system set up where there's a little bit of leeway. People can supposed to arrive for their shift at 8 o'clock, but they've got until 8:15 to clock in. Now they know that because people tend to find these things out. And we do the analysis and we find that 80% of the clock-ins happen between 12 minutes past and 8:15. So by the time those teams actually start working, it's more like 8:30. So you've lost half an hour of work on every shift because you're trying to be lenient to allow people a bit more time to clock in. Okay, and there are various ways to manage that to make sure, and you say, well, but they still did their shift. The reality is over time, that makes a massive difference to the organization, results in significantly more overtime and less efficiency. So it's little things like that. And we've got the data with time and attendance. So it's how do you use it and how do you monitor it? Okay, so if we look at a practical case study. So I'm going to go back to the same thing we talked about earlier in terms of sick leave. So what I want to do here is take you through the steps to just create this at a very simple level so that you can understand the basics of the BI tool and why it works nicely. Okay, so just a reminder, we decided what we want to see. So we want to see the sick leave data and we want to rank it by those people who have taken the most sick leave in a particular period of time. We get the data and we link it to the BI tool. We teach the BI tool how to clean up the data, and I'm going to take you through all of these things. We set up our dashboards and calcs, and then if we want to refresh, we just click refresh, okay? What I'm not going to take you through is the actions. We talked about those earlier, and those tend to come out of these at a later stage. So if you give me a second, I'm just going to... Okay, so all we're looking at in terms of the data, so we're looking at sick leave data. Okay, so this is an example of sick leave data that's come out of a payroll system. Okay, it's not so easy to see. It's just in the sort of standard format, but what we've got here is we've got the name of the payroll, we've got an employee number, so that's the employee number of the particular employee, and this is the type of leave type. So a 1 is annual leave, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're looking at here is sick leave. We could extend the study to look at all sorts of other types of leave, but for the purpose of this analysis, we're just going to look at sick leave. Okay, so category 6. Here are the dates. They're not in a great format, but that's not a problem at all. So what we would do is, in a perfect world, we'd link directly to the system, so this pulls automatically. If the system doesn't allow that, then all we do is extract the data in the same format. We don't want to waste time manually changing headers or manually changing any of this data, and we just save it in a nice place where we can access it. Then what we've got here is this is what the BI tool would look like. So this is Power BI that I'm using, but ClickView would be very similar. So obviously I'm not going to take you through what each of the menus look like. That's not really what the session is about. But what we've got here is in this section here, this is where we pull in that leave data. So it pulls that data. I have it in Excel. That's what it looks like. So it looks exactly the same as we had when I showed you the Excel. On the right here is, if you recall, I said that we can use the BI tool to clean up the data. Okay, so what this does is it goes stepwise. It says I'm going to find the data, then I'm going to promote the headers, I'm going to change the type of some of the leave, I'm going to remove top rows, I'm going to rename some of the columns so they're easier for me to look at. You can do all sorts of various things that at the end of it, you've got data that is then easy for you to use. So it's got nice headers. I've changed some of the stuff that I need to look at to make it a number format, whatever else it might be. And I also added a column here that says, look, the leave type If it's a 1, it's annual leave. If it's a 6, it's sick leave. So I've put in some words so that it's much easier for a user to use it. Okay. Now that will happen automatically when you refresh your data. So all you're doing is you're cleaning up the data so it makes it easier for you then to work with. I then go back and I'm in the main part of the BI tool, and I can then create what they call tiles or visuals. Okay, so I've created a visual that looks at all the leave over a period of time. And if I want to look at it in a bit more detail, I just click on that and I can see in a little bit more detail what's happening. If I want to export the data to Excel, I can export the data. If I want to sort it, if I want to filter it, there are various filters that I can use. Okay, I'm not going to go into all the details of the BI tool. The other nice thing about it is real time. So you could be sitting in an Exco meeting and the CEO says, what happened? I see there was a spike in sick leave in this period here. And you can click on that and your whole analysis changes to reflect that. Okay. We can also build in a sort of a calculation on the cost of absenteeism. Okay. In this instance, I've done a very simple one and I've just assumed an average payroll cost. Okay. But you could link it directly to payroll data and do it based on a rate of pay. So it's very accurate. I then have a sheet here for individual absenteeism. So going back to our whole thing here, our whole hypothesis, what I would be doing, and obviously I've anonymized who the employees are. I could link this to master info, so I've got their first names, surnames, everything I need. And I go, okay, I'm going to look at these top 10 people, okay? And I could actually include a little table that shows me who I have already investigated or what the reason is. Okay, so those are the people I would look at. So very simply, you can build something that's easy to update. And if I wanted to, I could, for example, just print out a report in PDF that can go to a particular manager for him to look at somebody once I've selected it based on his or her employees. So relatively simple to use and not that difficult to set up. Just by way of example, we have, this is a simplified dashboard that we've built for some of our clients. This is not necessarily what you do. So this is not necessarily using the BI tool for a specific intervention. This is more using it as a management reporting tool. So I'm not sure why it's so slow. Give it a sec. Where this is nice for HR is it gives them a snapshot of what's happening. Okay, so what we've built in here is it's all using stuff from the payroll system. So we're not searching for data. It takes, if the payroll system is not linked automatically, it probably takes 10 minutes to download the reports. Okay, but we've got a head count by cost center, by department. We've got the age profile that's there. It'll be refreshed on whenever we do the reports. We've got the absenteeism, the individual absenteeism. We've got a recruitment table that looks at our leavers last few months, joiners last few months, when probation ends, who our retirees are. We've got a payroll. So this can look at payroll and break it up into the different sections, and we can look at the areas that we want to look at. We can include in here any disciplinary records that we've had, sick leave interventions, whatever else it might be.
Hi, John T. Sorry to interrupt. Are you sharing the dashboard example?
Is it not coming through? Sorry. No. Thanks, Akila. Apologies, everybody. Let me run through that again. Okay, sorry. So let me start again so you can get a feel for this. So this is, and apologies if it looks a bit small. So we've got the headcount tab that looks at headcount by cost center, by the age profile, by department. We look at the absenteeism, which I talked about earlier, which look very similar. We've got recruitment. So who are joiners, who are leavers, where probation ends, where are retirees in the next 5 years. We look at payroll. So we can devise tiles and metrics, look at things and have a much better feel for what's happening. We can have disciplinary records, people that we've had specific interventions in their outcome. We can build in the employment equity stats. Okay, where we find this most relevant is when we're doing employment equity or skills reporting for clients. the biggest challenge we have is the quality of the underlying data. Okay, so we can build in little tiles that show us who's missing job titles, who's missing ethnicity, where are we sitting with situations, how are we doing against targets. Okay, and this is something that can just keep you updated on a monthly basis, and it's all about using the BI tools. So that's skills development. Okay, I won't deal with anything. We've got other things that are specific around particular time, and something to do with time, etc., etc. So you can build your dashboard as you want to. Okay, so then let's do 1 second, please, just to conclude then before we take any further questions, just to come back to what we're trying to achieve here. Okay, so I mentioned at the beginning, okay, about what HR and finance can take from these things. For finance, it will be a lot easier to think about using tools to identify cost savings and to look at specific targets. In our experience, HR tends to be nervous of the numbers because that's what they've trained to do. They're trained to look at qualitative data and concepts, training, recruitment, succession planning, performance reviews, all of those things. And they're nurturing people and building all of those things up together nicely. Okay. However, because of that, we always see a risk that when you get to a difficult time like now, HR is seen as a cost center. Okay, because they're seen as a cost to the organization, they're often the first to lose resources when we get into a difficult period. We really think that there's a huge advantage in using these type of tools for HR, because if you think about it, HR has this ability to work across departments and across cost centers in a way that very few other parts of the organization can. So if you build your credibility around using BI tools and dashboards and targets and all the rest to save on payroll, which is one of the biggest cost elements, suddenly you become much more relevant within the organization as strategically an important resource. And that's what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to use a tool which is not expensive, okay, to help you to use factual data to drive improvements in the organization. So I hope that's been useful. There are obviously a lot of elements to it. We've really scratched the surface. Always interested in chatting further. So if you'd like to have a follow-up conversation with myself or one of the team, please let us know. So I think then if we talk then to any questions, if you do have any questions, please feel free to post it in the Q&A, and I'd be happy to respond to it. Akido, are there any at the moment? Okay, I'll give that a minute or two. Okay, well, if there are no questions, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today. I hope that it was of use and that you take some good points away. As I say, if you'd like to reach out to us and talk further about how some of the metrics or the BI tools might work in your business or around building dashboards, then we're always happy to help. While I do push it as an easy tool for you to do yourself, and we do recommend that you do it yourself because you get the most advantage if you're building it and you're working with it and analyzing things yourself, it is often helpful if we come out and just make sure that things are done in the right way to start with. So please feel free to give us a call. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.